In 1976, at the Eucharistic Congress in Philadelphia, the then Cardinal Krokov, presently St. John Paul II, made a statement. We are now standing in the face of the greatest historical confrontation humanity has ever experienced. I do not think that the wide circle of American society or the wide circle of the Christian community realize this fully. We're now facing the final confrontation between the church and the anti-church, between the gospel and the anti-gospel, between Christ and the antichrist. This confrontation lies within the plans of divine providence. It is therefore in God's plan and must be a trial which the church must take up and face courageously. Then it goes on to say, we must prepare ourselves to suffer great trials before long, such as will demand us a disposition to give up even life in total dedication to Christ and for Christ. With your and my prayers, it's possible to mitigate this coming tribulation, but it's no longer possible to avert it, because only thus can the church be effectually renewed. How many times has the renewal of the church sprung from the shedding of blood? This time, it will not be otherwise. We must be strong and prepared and trust in Christ and His Holy Mother, and be very, very assiduous in praying the Rosary continuously. Hello and welcome to Closer Walk Catholic Communications. I'm Father Byer, your host. We're glad that you can join us. And we're kind of changing up the format a little bit today. This was given over 40 years ago. Then Cardinal Krokov saw where we were going in society and has tried to warn us. First of all, I don't think many people have even heard the warning. Secondly, far too many people have ignored the warning. And so today I'm very, very happy to have a guest who's going to help us kind of break this down. Many of you know him from EWTN, and Father Mitch Pacwa is one of these really bright guys who, because he's here, we all feel a little bit smarter. That's a great gift that Father Mitch brings to the church. He has great knowledge, but he does it in such a way that makes us all feel smarter and not dumber. So we're glad to welcome to Closer Walk, Father Mitch.
Father Bye, how the heaven are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Full spit and vinegar.
A little spit and vinegar.
Yes,
and we cleaned him up, by the way. We made him look good for television today. Father Mitch, that's that prophetic voice. Then Cardinal Krokov. Unfortunately, he was absolutely right.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we see going on is part of the upcoming tribulation. Father, help us look at this, break it down, do whatever.
First, I would say that it's not about the upcoming tribulation. In 1976, we were in the midst of it. A lot of folks don't pay enough attention to the way the real world is in terms of facts and figures
and by the
that
way,
are relevant.
76 was the year you were ordained a priest.
It was the year I was ordained a priest, right about that time, just before that.
And I'm just a couple years after you.
And that was also the 200th anniversary of the United States. That's why they went to Philadelphia for that Eucharistic Congress, because this was the celebration of the Declaration of Independence, where the basic values of the United States were laid out as reasons to separate ourselves from the British Empire. And in that, they made as principle that we have unalienable rights. That means rights that cannot be taken away from you by anyone, because they are from the Creator. And that those rights are to life, number one, liberty, number two, and the pursuit of happiness, number three. And that no human being gave us those rights, and no human being can take them away, including the British Empire. Even though the British Empire was headed by the head of their church, the Church of England, that still did not mean that the King of England had the authority or the power to take away those rights.
Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
And it's interesting how the Declaration of Independence concludes by stating that they will all be subject to the judgment of nature's God. So they knew where they came from, and they knew where they were headed, and that they were responsible. And this is the document that was being celebrated that summer, July 4th of 1976, the 200th anniversary. And they had the Eucharistic Congress to remind us Catholics, who were not all that welcome. Begrudgingly, Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter saying, well, we have to let these folks in. He was specifically talking about Jesuits. He said, we begrudgingly have to let them in because our Constitution, requires it. But there was still a lot of anti-Catholicism in the colonies and the early states, a number of which, particularly the southern colonies and New England colonies, made it illegal for Catholics to hold office.
That was a big John Kennedy presidential run in 1960.
Exactly. And a lot of Catholic politicians on the national and local level since. But this celebration also brought out that by that point, the Catholic community was now no longer an unwelcome community. We were the largest religious community in the country. About a fourth of the country is Catholic. Secondly, we were the second best educated and second wealthiest religious community, thanks to the sisters and brothers and priests that gave of themselves to teach us in the Catholic school system. It's remarkable how that occurred.
And I might just add, Elizabeth Ann Seton, who at the time when the African American community was just the stepchild of anyone and everyone, that is Elizabeth Ann Seton, who made the education in the African American community as well as the Native American community a priority, and that was...
And so did Mother Drexel. Mother Catherine Drexel did the same.
Out of Philadelphia.
Out of Philadelphia, one of the wealthiest families in the colonies and then in the early United States. And she knew that this was something that God placed in their hands for the use beyond themselves and their own power. So the Catholic community has had a tremendous change of status, and this celebration of rights that come from God and of our Catholic commitment to Christ. That's why it was a Eucharistic Congress, that we focus on Jesus Christ, still present among us, body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Blessed Sacrament. And that celebration is one that drew together many leaders, including John Paul himself, kind of well known. A lot of folks don't remember this, but he was a guest professor of philosophy at Harvard University because he was one of the world experts on a branch of philosophy that is not quite so well known, phenomenology, but still was very important. And he knew English and he understood a lot about America and many other countries. That was part of his gift. But as I say, when I began, he was not talking about the beginning of a chastisement or a purging. He was in the middle of it. What folks forget about the 20th century is that there were more martyrs in the 20th century for our faith than in the previous 1900 years combined.
I didn't know that.
In the 2,000-year history of the Catholic Church, there have been about 75 million martyrs for our faith. 35 million died from 36 AD until 1900. 35 million. In the 1900s, from beginning right around the turn of the century till the end of the 20th century, 40 million more martyrs died.
So we're talking about Stalin, we're talking about
Hitler,
we're talking
Mao
about
Zedong, Pol Pot. And what's interesting about the Pope's statement, while a number of people falsely claim religion is the biggest cause of war in history.
Yeah.
You hear that all the time.
Yep.
Doesn't matter. It's on NPR. I've heard it from on Fox News from Geraldo Rivera. Hear it all over the place, and they take it as if it's just true. That was a statement made in the 1650s by an English philosopher, and they were in the middle of the English Revolution. And the 30-year wars had gone on. So in his day, there were very serious religious wars. And he extrapolated from that there had been all this killing all the centuries in the name of religion. However, the reality is this. In the history of Christianity, there have been about 2.25 million people killed in religious wars. 2.25 or so, 2.3, right in that range. It's hard to have real precise figures, but some people will say, well, what about the millions killed in the Crusades? Crusades, 650,000 people died in 250 years of war.
Wow.
Now, contrast that with the war in this country over slavery, that those who denied the Declaration of Independence being valid for African Americans and say, no, you don't have the right to freedom, and the Supreme Court saying in Dred Scott, you are inferior to white people and therefore deserve to be a slave. Between 650 and 700,000 people died in 4 years of a war about slavery.
All right. Well, I want you to hold that thought, and we're going to come back and kind of bring it into the present, some of the things that we do. Mm-hmm. We need to take a break here. Hi, I'm Father Jeff Bae from Closer Walk Catholic Communications. Thank you for being here today, and a special thanks for the support that you give us. First of all, your prayerful support we so desperately need, and also your financial support. We are donor-driven, and that is what keeps us on the air today. As you well know, the truth is in great demand and in very short supply, and mainstream media is not going to bring you the truth of the Gospels of our Lord Jesus Christ because that's not socially acceptable and it's not politically correct. Certainly we all realize that when this life journey's over, we don't stand before the Supreme Court, we stand before the throne of God. Therefore, with great clarity and great charity, to pronounce the truth of the gospel is important. Your prayers, your financial support enables us to do that. So we thank you, and may God bring you closer in your walk with the Lord each day. God bless you. We're now facing the final confrontation between the church and the anti-church, between the gospel and the anti-gospel, between Christ and the antichrist. Hello and welcome back to Close to Walk Catholic Communications. I'm Father Bayer, your host, and again, we're very happy to have with us Father Mitch Pacwa from EWTN, and he's kind of given us historical context as to how this has happened. And now, Father Mitch, we want to look at, I don't think a lot of people realize what the confrontation is.
See, that's exactly right. And when you think about Karol Wojtyła, the Cardinal Krokov, who was 19 years old when the Nazis invaded Poland, 18 or 19. And he lived through the Nazi occupation, was looked for while he was trying to study in an underground seminary.
Working in a quarry, I think.
Working in a quarry. Which, by the, I don't know if you've ever been to Poland.
I have.
And one of the things about the quarry, it is right below the hill where Saint Faustina was buried.
Oh my, okay.
You can go to her original grave, not where the church is, she's in the church now, but her original grave, you look right over into that quarry. And he used to stop on the way at the church to pray for mercy, and that's where he learned about the divine mercy, and he learned to pray not only for his suffering friends, his Jewish friends who had been executed, his and himself and his the other folks around him, but also to pray for the Nazis. You know, this and extend God's mercy. He lived this, and then the communists took over. So he lived through this anti-church headed by antichrists. Remember what St. John says, the only place where antichrist is defined is in 1 John 2 and 1 John 4, in which antichrist is anyone who denies that Jesus is the Son made flesh, and who denies the Son denies the Father. That's antichrist. That's who is attacking. He lived standing up against antichrist and anti-church, and what attempted to replace us with National Socialism, in the case of Hitler, and communism and state-run economy and state-run of your life under communism. He lived that and saw that and managed to work through that in very great cleverness, showing how this is bereft of spirit. And this confrontation is what he then brought on a few years later when he went to Poland.
And also seeing what was going on in the world, in the rejection of certain values within the church. Within the church of trying to go Catholic light and, you know, do the Kumbaya catechesis.
Well, it was an attempt by a lot of Catholic theologians to take the line from St. John the 23rd at the opening of the Vatican Council, learn to read the signs of the times. That is right. You should read the signs of the times and understand what's going on. The problem is a lot of theologians and clergy and religious bought whatever these signs were selling. And they went into all kind of foolishness, watering down our faith.
You and I were in the seminary at that time.
Yep.
You and I went through all of that.
Yep.
And you and I had to deal with, wait a minute, you know, and I got to be honest, I wasn't bright enough to catch on the subtleties at the time. But you live 40 years as a priest and you go, it's exactly what they were doing. It's exactly what they were talking about. Father Mitch, take an issue and take it from back in the 60s and bring it to today, how we have allowed ourselves to be caught, and the final confrontation is coming here, and we just little by little, you know, incrementally, the incrementalism that, you know, guess what? You know, you're cooked, but we didn't know it. We've been getting cooked all along. Take an issue and do that.
One obvious one that's had catastrophic effects on our culture. 1968, July, Pope, now Saint Paul VI, issued Humanae Vitae. Everybody focused on this prohibits birth control instead of understanding this is portraying the integrity of human sexuality inside marriage, so that the sexual act is both for procreation. That is what it is oriented to on the natural basis. It is also oriented to love, especially among humans. And what we saw in the night that he published it, a press conference was held at a hotel in New York City by a theologian, Father Charles Curran, and he posited that, look, you can distinguish procreation, having children, from love. Love is more important. Therefore, if you love somebody, then you can go ahead and use contraception. That was his logic. Now, it sounded, well, yeah, I mean, love is good, and you want people to love each other, but then it moved quickly. Well, if I love somebody and I'm not really interested in procreation, then, as he himself later on said, that if you love somebody, you can have sex with that person without being married to them. Then, of course, same-sex relationships are on a par because you love each other, and it's not about procreation.
Father Mitch, let me ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
You're not about the same age. You were raised in the 50s and 60s, and you were raised by a Polish family. I was raised by a big Lebanese family. You went to Catholic schools. How many classmates had parents who were divorced?
I didn't know any.
I knew one.
Yeah.
In 8 years, I knew one.
I didn't know any.
And now, when love is the preface, look what marriage and family life has done.
Well, that was another thing that he said, therefore divorce and remarriage is okay because you love the other person. And he even went to a point of saying that, well, of course, in an interview on 60 Minutes, he said, well, yeah, even abortion is acceptable because you love the person, but you didn't intend to procreate, so you can fix that mistake. Or you can commit adultery. Now, this kind of isolation of sexuality from procreation came at the time of the sexual revolution. And at the same time, you also saw the government getting more involved in family life, where if a father of a child left and abandoned the family, then the government would take care of them. And when I'm just a little bit older than you, just a couple of years, but in the 1940s, when I was born, the rate of out-of-wedlock birth was 4%. By 1960, it had gone up to 5%, primarily in the African American community, which was 16%. And then by 1965, they had gone up to 24% as the government got more involved. And then, as you just keep on progressing, I won't go through all of it, but right now, it is 52% of all children are born to unmarried parents because the parents loved each other, they didn't intend procreation, but, especially for those who promote birth control, the increased sales of the condoms and of the birth control pill and other devices, primarily those two, follows exactly the same curve upward of out-of-wedlock birth. The increase of abortion follows the curve of the sales of condoms and the pill. And also the increase of sexually transmitted diseases follows that same curve. In other words, this is from the Center for Disease Control. This isn't some Catholic ideological group. Center for Disease Control shows the more you use condoms and the pill, the more you get sexual diseases, out of wedlock birth, and abortion increases. The opposite of what they said would happen.
And
with safe sex. And why is it? Because people take more risks. Not love. They don't love each other. They have lust. They fall madly in lust. Yes.
And heat.
Yeah. But this is something that's key to understand. The catastrophic effects of this, because the children of unmarried parents are less than 50% likely to finish high school, more than 60% likely to become unmarried parents, and they have the highest drug use and the highest likelihood of ending up in jail and the likelihood of poverty. 80% of those who are incarcerated are the children of unmarried parents.
Sidebar, Father Mitch. With this, you know, a few years ago we had this girl, I'm in college, you need to buy my birth control pills. It costs me.
Right.
Okay. Margaret Sanger, the mother of modern birth control, met with Joseph Mengele. They called it eugenics.
That's
the
right.
reason why they promoted birth control, we had too many Catholics, too many blacks, too many Slavs, and too many Jews being born in this country. And if we're going to remain a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant nation, we need to make sure that they don't overrun us. And now we preach this in the name of women's health care, which was designed to destroy us.
Margaret Sanger gave that message 5 different times at Ku Klux Klan conventions.
I know.
And called blacks a weed that must be removed. That's her words that she put in print.
Exactly.
Now, this is something where you see that kind of divorce of love and procreation led to a divorce of morality and the breakdown of family and a catastrophe for children especially.
Absolutely.
And so that's just an example of one area of foolish theology bringing us to catastrophic behavior.
Absolutely. And you know, Father Mitch, the fact that we don't understand it, the fact that we don't connect the dots, means we're destined to repeat it, and we think it's a fait accompli. We think it's just a sign of society, and don't realize it's a sign of our own ignorance.
Exactly.
Father Mitch, thank you. We're going to have you back.
All right.
Appreciate your being
My
here.
pleasure.
Thank you so much.
My
God bless.
pleasure.
Thank you for being with us today. May each day bring you closer in your walk with the Lord. God bless you.